Hello there, and welcome to Echoes of the Imperium. I'm truly glad you've arrived. Maybe it's been a long day, or maybe you're the kind of soul who prefers to drift into sleep with thoughts of distant stars and ancient cosmic secrets instead of counting sheep. Either way, tonight's journey belongs to you. You don't need to do anything now, just rest. Let your mind grow quiet, your breath steady, and your body feel lighter. As if even the pull of gravity has begun to fade away. I did not understand the scale of him until the day he arrived, until the thunderhead tore open above the shrine world of Carthax, and something impossibly bright descended through the storm. A silhouette shaped like a man but burning like a fallen star, a figure who seemed to drag daylight behind him as though the void itself struggled to smother his radiance. And I remember thinking, in that single trembling heartbeat before the ecclesiarchy began screaming hymns of deliverance, that we were witnessing either the birth of a new age or the opening act of our extinction, because nothing pure survives long in the Imperium, and nothing hopeful enters our realm unbroken. His name was Kal-El, though later the Administratum reclassified him as Subject Sigma 1, the first being in Imperial history to arrive unbidden from a breach in real space without warp residue, a creature whose biology rejected demonic signatures like oil cast upon water, whose very presence seemed to calm the screaming of astropathic channels for leagues in every direction. And the first time I stood near him, during the initial interrogatio ceremony, I felt something I had not felt since childhood: quiet. Not peace, no, that is a luxury we cannot afford, but a silence so deep I could hear the blood moving behind my own eyes. I was Inquisitor Marin Vale of the Ordo Xenos then, tasked with determining whether this off-world titan was a threat, a tool, or an omen. Though in truth I already knew the answer. The Imperium does not believe in omens unless they can be weaponized. He landed gently, almost reverently, on the marble steps of the Basilica of St. Drusilla, and the sight of a being so powerful choosing to place his feet softly on holy ground frightened me more than any demon I have ever slain. For in this galaxy strength is loud, brutal, and absolute, but he moved with the caution of someone terrified of breaking the world he was trying to protect. He said he came from a dying star, a world that had torn itself apart, and that he sought only to help, to heal, to prevent the same outcome from befalling others. A confession that made several Puritans reach for their plasma pistols, for only heretics speak of mercy as though it were attainable. Yet Kal-El did not waver. His voice was steady, impossibly calm, and when he spoke of justice, it felt like an ancient concept resurrected, something older than Terra itself. At first, the High Lords debated whether he was a precursor species remnant, a shardling of some pre-imperial pantheon, or a Xenos infiltrator wearing a pleasing human shape. But none of their theories survived contact with the truth. He was beyond our categories, beyond our rationalizations, an anomaly in a galaxy that had forgotten what anomalies felt like. When we conducted the initial trials, bolter fire, lost volleys, the psychic pressure tests, he endured them with an expression I can only describe as disappointed, like a father watching his children test him with sticks. Not once did he lash out. Not once did he display anger. He simply asked, "Why do you hurt yourself so much?" And the hall fell so silent that even the servo skulls dimmed their lumen eyes. The ecclesiarch saw in him a new Primarch. The Mechanicus saw a biological engine that violated every law of physics they worshipped. The Astra Militarum saw a strategic asset capable of turning any war. I, Marin Vale, saw something far more dangerous, a good man. Because in the Imperium of Man, there is no greater threat to stability than someone who truly believes they can fix it. Still, the High Lords allowed him to try, and try he did. I followed him for months across the Segmentum Solar, recording every interaction, every miracle, every impossible feat. I watched him rebuild a collapsed hab spire by hand in the span of an hour. Watched him fly through an orbital bombardment to save a transport full of pilgrims. Watched him confront a rogue psyker whose mind had split open like rotten fruit. Kal-El simply walked through the warp lightning as though through falling snow and held the psyker until the man stopped screaming. He never killed unless there was no other choice. He mourned every life lost. Emperor, forgive me, but he cared. And that is when I began to fear him. Because the Imperium does not bend. It breaks, it does not heal. It cauterizes, it does not forgive. It endures. And somewhere deep inside, I sensed that Kal-El had not yet realized this truth. Had not yet understood that the weight of 10,000 years of blood could not be lifted by one pair of righteous hands. no matter how strong they were. The first sign of fracture came on the desert world of Vetus IV, where an entire regiment of the 34th Cadian refused to execute civilians accused of witchcraft after Kal-El deflected the commissar's bolt round mid-air and said, without raising his voice, "These people are innocent." That moment, just that single act, sparked a schism that spread like cracks through stained glass. Soldiers began looking at him as a redeemer. Priests began quoting his words in sermons. And in the eyes of the High Lords, a saint is far more dangerous than a monster. To understand what followed, you must understand the Imperium's oldest truth. Hope is heresy. And Kal-El, for all his gentleness, for all his impossible power, did not yet understand that in the grim darkness of the far future, hope is not a light. It is a spark that invites the pyre. As I walked beside him through the burning marketplaces of Vetus, I noticed for the first time a shadow behind his smile, a faint tremor, a hesitation, as though he were beginning to realize that every life he saved unbalanced a scale the Imperium refused to let tilt. And perhaps that is why I still dream of that moment. The sun setting red behind the dunes, his cape fluttering like a banner of defiance, and me beside him recording every detail for the Ordo, all while secretly praying that he would either save us all or die before we destroyed him. In hindsight, I know now that both outcomes were impossible. This universe only allows one ending, and Kal-El, for all his might, for all his conviction, had no idea that he was walking straight into the jaws of a godless machine that devours saviors whole. That even he, the brightest thing to walk among our broken stars, could be hurt by the weight of our existence, not through strength or weaponry, but through the slow, crushing erosion of a civilization built on fear and ritualized despair. And it began on the void station Lumen Veritas, a place suspended like a rusted crown above the gas giant Volturnus, a labyrinth of steel prayer towers and ossified catacombs where pilgrims and tithe workers lived in a perpetual twilight of incense smoke and flickering lumen globes. The air there always smelled of machine oil and old bones, and the walls trembled with the constant hum of the reactor scriptures the tech priests sang to keep the station alive. Kal-El came because he had received a distress call, a garbled plea from a child, a voice drowning in static, begging for someone, anyone, to save them from the shadows that eat the lights. When he entered the station's central corridor, I followed 3 steps behind him, servo skulls drifting anxiously around us, my rosette gleaming under the dying lumens, and I noticed immediately how the people looked at him, not with awe, not with reverence, but with a kind of exhausted longing, as though they had prayed for salvation for so long that seeing a figure who resembled those prayers made their hearts ache. He moved with quiet purpose, scanning the trembling metal floor, listening to the distant thrum of ventilation fans miles away, and then, very softly, he whispered, "Something here is wrong." He was right. The shadows on Lumen Veritas did not behave like ordinary absence of light. They clung to corners as though alive, twisting like slow-moving smoke, pulsing faintly with a wrongness only a psyker could detect. When he approached one of the walls, his hand hovering inches from the darkened metal, I saw the shadows recoil from him as though light were a predator and they were prey, and it was then, at that precise moment, that the first ripple of warp taint revealed itself. The lights went out, not flickered, not dimmed. They died with a shriek inside the wires, leaving us in a darkness so absolute it felt physical, like thick velvet pulled over the soul. I activated my auspex and whispered a prayer to the Emperor, but Kal-El did not move. Instead, his eyes ignited with a soft golden glow that cut through the blackness like twin lanterns, and he stepped forward as if walking through a dream. "They're afraid," he murmured. "Not of us. Of something behind the walls." I should have turned back. Any rational man would have. But I followed him deeper into the station, past rows of abandoned shrines and collapsed passageways scrawled with frantic chalk prayers, until we reached the habitation quarter where the first bodies lay, frozen in expressions of pure terror, their eyes wide and bloodshot, their mouths open in silent screams, and their skin stretched thin, as though something had pulled the life out of them like thread. I have seen demons. I have seen warp entities peel the sanity from a man's skull with a whisper. But what we found there was different. There was no warp stench, no psychic residue, just absence, like something had erased their souls with clinical precision. Kal-El knelt beside a corpse, touching the cold cheek with a gentleness that did not belong in a place like this, and whispered, No one should die afraid. His voice cracked. A small human moment, a fracture, and I realized then how deeply he felt every loss, how profoundly the Imperium's endless brutality wounded him, not physically, but spiritually. We pressed onward, following the faint echoes of the child's distress call, until we reached the central reactor chamber, a cathedral-sized void filled with towering plasma conduits glowing faintly like dying coals. The shadows were thicker here, swirling lazily across the floor like ink suspended in water, and Kal-El tensed, his fists clenched. "It's feeding," he said. "Something is feeding on them." Before I could respond, the shadows surged with lightning speed, coiling around his legs, latching onto his arms, dragging him downward with a strength that defied physics. I reached for my Inferno pistol, but the darkness swallowed my hand, numbing the flesh instantly, and Kal-El shouted, an actual cry of pain, as the shadow tendrils seeped into him, searching for something inside his chest, drawn to the light in him like predators drawn to warmth. He tore them off, his eyes blazing, releasing a burst of heat that illuminated the chamber like a newborn sun, and the shadows recoiled, shrieking in a sound too low for human ears. But not before they wounded him. Not before a tendril pierced his side, leaving behind a shallow gash that shimmered like molten gold. He touched the wound, stared at the glowing blood on his fingertips, and whispered, not in fear but in disbelief, "They can hurt me." In that moment, as the reactor trembled and the shadows fled into cracks in the floor, I saw something change in him. A realization, a quiet horror, not that he could bleed, but that everything he believed about protecting others now carried a cost he had never imagined. The child's voice echoed again, closer, clearer, trembling with fear, and Kal-El stood, ignoring his wound, lifting the entire collapsed reactor door with one hand as though it were made of parchment. Behind it, we found the survivors huddled together, a dozen trembling workers and one little girl clutching a broken Vox bead, her cheeks stained with tears. When she saw him, she didn't ask who he was. She simply whispered, "You came." And Kal-El smiled. A soft, pained smile. A smile that tried to hide the blood on his side. He carried them out one by one, shielding them from the darkness still slithering through the ventilation grates. And when we finally emerged into the docking bay, the survivors looked at him not as a warrior or a living weapon, but as something the Imperium had forgotten could even exist, a protector who arrived not to command or condemn, but simply to save. But the High Lords would not see it that way. They would see the shadows. They would see the wound. They would see the fractures forming in the perfect weapon they imagined him to be. And as Kal-El stared at the glowing blood drying on his skin, jaw clenched, eyes dimmed with a grief that did not belong inside any mortal creature, I knew with absolute certainty that this universe was beginning to crush him, not with battles, but with truths. Truths far sharper than any blade. Truth that would break him long before any enemy ever could. I began to realize the true danger Kal-El posed, not to the Imperium's enemies, but to the Imperium itself, the day he tried to change the way we wage war. The day he made the catastrophic mistake of believing that compassion could be integrated into Imperial doctrine. And it happened on the war-torn world of Hraxos Prime, a blasted wasteland where the sky bled ash and the ground churned with the crushed remnants of cities ground beneath the treads of 20 titans and the boots of 5 million guardsmen. The air there always tasted like rust and regret, and even the wind seemed to howl with the voices of the dead. The 68th Armageddon, Steel Legion had been fighting an orc incursion for months. Tireless waves of green-skinned brutes hammering at their trenches like a tidal storm of muscle and brutality. And by the time Kal-El arrived, the regiment had already lost half its number, and the commissariat had executed a quarter of the survivors for insufficient zeal. The world was dying, slowly, painfully, inevitably, and yet when Kal-El landed in the middle of no man's land, vaporizing a rain of incoming artillery shells with nothing more than a glance, everything stopped. The orcs roared in confusion. The guards stared in disbelief. Even the titans hesitated, their machine spirits flickering with sudden uncertainty. When he lifted a fallen Baneblade turret off a trapped squad of guardsmen with one hand and set it aside gently, like a man moving furniture in a home, the soldiers fell to their knees not out of worship, but out of exhaustion, as though they had finally been allowed to breathe. He told the commanders to stop the artillery barrage, told them the orcs' momentum could be broken without annihilating the civilian districts behind their lines, told them there was a way to win without grinding the world into dust. And I watched their faces twist with a mixture of confusion, offense, and bureaucratic panic, because he was speaking a language the Imperium had forgotten. A language that made sense only to someone who had never witnessed our 10,000 years of rot. I recorded everything, knowing the Ordo would demand details. Knowing the High Lords were already suspicious of how soldiers and refugees alike were beginning to whisper his name with something dangerously close to reverence. Kal-El moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, disarming orcs with a flick of his wrist, shielding guardsmen from shrapnel with his body, flying into the midst of a charging mob and tossing them aside without killing them, not because he feared bloodshed, but because he believed every life spared was a victory. And that belief, that naive, beautiful belief, was what doomed him. The Commissar of the 68th, Lord Varric Drim, confronted him in the trenches after Kal-El prevented the execution of 3 guardsmen who had retreated under heavy fire. Drim was a towering figure in his greatcoat of stamped steel plates, purity seals fluttering like torn prayers, his bionic jaw clicking as he spoke. And he looked at Kal-El not with awe but with bureaucratic disgust. "Mercy," Drim spat, "is a contagion, and contagions must be purged." Kal-El didn't flinch. He simply placed a hand on the barrel of Drim's bolt pistol and lowered it gently, an act so subtle it was almost tender, and yet the implications were catastrophic. Soldiers in the trenches murmured. Some wept, a few dropped to their knees, and the orcs, confused by the sudden pause in slaughter, retreated to regroup, shouting in their brutish tongue about the blue cape Humi who fights like a god but doesn't kill proper. But it was what happened next that sealed the Imperium's judgment. Kal-El, seeing the orc warboss rallying his forces beyond the ridgeline, flew directly toward him, not to kill him, but to talk to him, to reason with him. "Emperor, help me." He tried to reason with an orc. He landed before the massive beast, a mountain of muscle wrapped in scrap metal adorned with glyphs of war, whose breath reeked of blood and fungus. And Kal-El said in that calm, steady voice of his, "You're hurting people who don't need to be hurt." The warboss stared at him. Then it laughed, a deep, booming, rattling roar that shook the dust from the trench walls, and swung a power claw the size of a thunderhawk wing straight at Kal-El's skull. And Kal-El caught it, not as an act of war, not as violence, but as one might catch a falling object to keep it from breaking. He held the warboss there, their eyes locked, and whispered, "You don't have to do this." The warboss, confused, enraged, ripped its arm free and bellowed. Orcs don't understand mercy. They understand strength. They understand dominance. And in that one moment, when Kal-El refused to kill the warboss, the orcs interpreted it as weakness. The entire mob surged, hundreds, thousands, a green tide of roaring brutality. Kal-El fought his way through them, trying to subdue, not destroy, pulling punches, restraining blows, refusing to give in to the Imperium's demand for absolute extermination. And that hesitation, that unbearable noble hesitation, got people killed. The orcs smashed through the defensive line. They tore apart 2 squads. They crippled a Chimera transport. They overwhelmed the 5th platoon, slaughtering them before Kal-El could reach them. I watched it all. I documented it all. And when Kal-El finally realized his mistake, when he finally unleashed his full strength and shattered the warboss's power armor with a single devastating punch that cracked the earth like thunder, it was already too late. For the first time, he looked broken, not physically but in spirit, standing among the bodies of soldiers he could not save, his fists trembling, his eyes dim with grief. He thought he could teach the Imperium a better way, but the Imperium only learned one lesson from what happened on Haraxos Prime. He was fallible. He hesitated. He disobeyed a commissar. And worst of all, he inspired soldiers to question their orders. That night, in the ashes of the battlefield, as the wounded were carried away and the orcs regrouped for another assault, Kal-El knelt alone beside the fallen guardsmen of 5th Platoon, whispering apologies to men who would never hear them. And I, Inquisitor Marin Vale, felt the first cold shadow of inevitability settle over him, realizing that the Imperium had already begun preparing the charges of sedition, insubordination, and ideological contamination. The galaxy was turning against him, and he didn't even know it yet. The first formal accusation against Kal-El, though unofficially there had been many, was drafted less than a week after the massacre at Hraxos Prime, and by then the whispers had already become a low, relentless drone throughout the Segmentum Solar that the star-born outsider was undermining discipline, sowing doubt, softening the Imperium with his alien ideals, and the Ordo Hereticus began watching him with the tense, hungry gaze of predators circling a wounded titan. I felt it immediately when we returned to Terra, stepping out onto the marble landing platform beneath the golden haze of the palace's outer lumen fields, the air thick with incense and suspicion. Custodians standing like statues carved from bronze, their eyes following Kal-El with an intensity that made even him pause. He still smiled, out of politeness or hope, or perhaps simple ignorance of the weight gathering around him. But the smile no longer reached his eyes, for the shadows of Hraxos had followed him home, clinging to his conscience like soot that refused to be washed away. I walked beside him through the vast echoing corridors of the Imperial Palace, past frescoes depicting 10,000 years of sanctioned cruelty, and wondered how he saw this place, not as the sacred fortress of mankind, but as a monument built atop a mountain of skulls, each one a reminder of a choice he would never have made. He was brought before the Senatorum Imperialis for evaluation, though everyone present knew it was a trial in all but name. And I stood behind him as a watcher, a recorder, a witness, or perhaps a Judas, while the High Lords studied him the way one might study a wild beast pretending to be tame. Fabricator General Corinth Theta hissed in Binharik about Kal-El's biological impossibility. The Admiral of the Imperial Navy questioned his strategic failures, and the Ecclesiarch, a gaunt man whose voice trembled with both fear and ambition, accused him of fostering a heresy of optimism. Kal-El listened to all of it calmly, hands folded behind his back, cape draped like a banner of fading hope, and when asked to speak, he said nothing defensive. Nothing inflammatory, only, "I am trying to save lives. That is all." The High Lords looked at him as if he had spoken in an extinct language. Their silence was an indictment. Compassion was not a valid defense in the Imperium. It was a liability. And though they did not condemn him outright, not yet, they assigned him a monitoring detachment, which was the polite term for placing an execution squad at his heels. Assassinorum agents disguised as aides, commissars seated behind him during briefings, black-robed scribes recording his every movement. And through it all, Kal-El pretended not to notice, though I could see in the stiffness of his shoulders, the subtle tension in his jaw, that he felt the net tightening. Still, he continued his work. Still, he tried to help. And still the Imperium punished him for every success, seeing in each rescued life not a victory, but a disruption of the great machine's rhythm of sacrifice. It was during his mission to the Forge World Epsilon Moors that the final fracture in public perception occurred. A catastrophic plasma breach in one of the Manufactorum cathedrals threatened to detonate half the planet, and Kal-El flew directly into the reactor core, holding back a chain reaction with nothing but his own body while adepts chanted emergency rites and prayed the machine spirit would not explode in divine fury. He spent 6 hours inside that inferno, absorbing enough radiation to kill 1,000 men instantly, holding the collapsing plasma lines together with brute strength and sheer will until the adepts managed to stabilize the containment field. When he emerged, smoke rising from his skin, armor half melted, eyes dim with exhaustion yet still gentle, the workers fell to their knees and called him Starborn Saint. That name spread like wildfire through labor cells, pilgrim caravans, guard regiments, administratum archives, and for a brief, terrible moment the Imperium glimpsed the possibility of a hero they had not manufactured, not indoctrinated, not shaped through terror, but through choice. And that, more than anything he had done, was unforgivable. The High Lords met in emergency convocation. The Ecclesiarchy announced an investigation into unauthorized veneration. The Officio Assassinorum received preliminary kill orders, though they were not executed immediately, for even they feared the consequences of failure. And I, Inquisitor Marin Vale, began to feel the cold coil of dread settle around my own throat. For I had spent too long beside him, had recorded too many moments of humanity that contradicted the Imperium's narrative, and I knew the Ordo would soon question where my loyalty truly lay. The final blow came from an unexpected direction, the Astra Militarum. A battalion of the 112th Vostroyan, inspired by Kal-El's intervention on a war-torn Agrimoon, refused an order to execute civilian collaborators who had offered food to chaos-raiding cultists. When pressed for justification, the battalion commander simply said, "The Starborn taught us there is another way." That single statement triggered a cascade of panic within the hierarchy. Mutiny by moral example. Discipline eroded not by rebellion, but by the possibility of something better. Kal-El had not set out to change the Imperium, but the Imperium was terrified that he might. The moment he learned of the Vestroyan execution, 300 soldiers purged for mercy, was the first time I saw him nearly break. He didn't rage. He didn't shout. He simply sat down on the edge of a transport ramp, staring at his hands as though seeing them for the first time, and whispered, "If everything I do causes more suffering, then what am I saving?" And I, a man who had interrogated psychers until their minds collapsed, who had burned entire continents of heretics into vitrified slag, felt something twist inside me. Pity, guilt, perhaps even admiration. And I realized that he was no longer fighting the Imperium's enemies. He was fighting its nature, and no one has ever won that battle. Not Primarchs, not saints, not even gods. I felt the shift in the air long before I reached the threshold, an almost imperceptible tremor, like the cathedral itself was inhaling after a long, patient slumber. The edifice rose before me as a jagged silhouette against the broken skies, its obsidian spires leaning inward like talons frozen mid-clutch. No imperial banners, no stained glass, only stone so ancient it had begun to mimic flesh, ridged, porous, and faintly pulsing, as though some grotesque parody of life had been coaxed into the architecture by centuries of worship to things unnamed. The wind did not whistle through its empty arches but whispered, as if forced through a throat not meant for air. And as I stepped closer, every instinct rooted in my training screamed at me to turn around. But duty, no, obsession, pulled me forward by the spine. My boots sank into dust that was not dust. The ground felt soft underfoot, as if covered in a thin layer of molted skin. Each step left an indentation that resisted, then reluctantly gave way. I swallowed hard and tried to control my breathing, but the moment I stepped past the outermost arch, the air changed. It grew warm, almost humid, like the breath exhaled by a sleeping beast. For a moment I genuinely believed the cathedral was alive, and that I was trespassing not into a building but into a lung. The entry hall stretched before me in an impossible geometry. Columns twisted upward like vertebrae, and the vaulted ceiling sagged gently in places as if weighted down by unseen organs. My lamp cast long shadows across the walls, where relief carvings depicted a procession of figures stripped of identity, faceless pilgrims with elongated limbs, all reaching toward a single towering entity crowned in bone and flame. The style was unmistakable. It was the kind of heretical iconography the ecclesiarchy burned entire worlds to erase. But what unsettled me most wasn't the imagery. It was the freshness of the carvings. They weren't chipped or weathered. They were wet, glistening ever so faintly under my light, as though they had been carved only moments before my arrival. I stepped closer, drawn by a mix of dread and morbid fascination. The carvings were warm under my glove, soft. I snatched my hand back instinctively, fighting the urge to vomit. My vox crackled with an incoherent burst of static, just enough noise to jolt me, enough to remind me that I was alone. I adjusted the gain, whispered a status update to no one in particular, and pressed deeper into the nave. The silence within was not true silence. It was layered, textured. Beneath it, I could hear faint, rhythmic thuds, like the distant beat of a heart confined behind miles of stone. The sound was slow, steady, ancient. I followed it without meaning to, my feet guided by something primal and stupid. The deeper I went, the more the cathedral seemed to narrow around me, constricting like a throat swallowing. The walls flexed, barely, subtly, whenever I passed. And though I told myself it was only paranoia, the illusion was too strong to dismiss entirely. Once I brushed against the wall by accident. It was warm. It twitched. My breath fogged in front of me, though the air remained warm. That made no sense. The temperature around me felt like a fever, yet moisture condensed at the edge of my vision as though I were breathing in cold. My equipment failed to register any anomalies, which only heightened my unease. Instruments can malfunction. Instinct rarely does. At the far end of the nave, veiled in shadow, stood the altar, if such a word could apply to the colossal slab of fleshy stone stretching from the floor to the ceiling. It throbbed in slow, nauseating pulses, as if blood flowed through veins buried deep within. Embedded across its surface were thousands of tiny bone fragments arranged like constellations. Ribs, finger bones, vertebrae, teeth. Most had been etched with runes that shifted when I looked at them, symbols my mind refused to hold still. I raised my lamp. Something moved behind the altar. I froze. My pulse hammered in my ears, but the movement did not repeat. Shadows can play tricks. My imagination can conjure threats where there are none. But then I heard it. A soft, dragging scrape, like claws being drawn across stone. Slow, deliberate, measured. I stepped back instinctively, but the floor felt too soft, too eager to keep me in place. My boots stuck for a fraction of a second before releasing with a tacky peel. The sound behind the altar stopped. Silence flooded the cathedral, thick and heavy. Then a voice, not spoken, not heard, but felt, pressed into the back of my skull like a cold hand. "Why have you come here?" I staggered, gasping as a wave of vertigo hit me. My lamp flickered violently, sputtering between shadow and dim light. The voice wasn't human. It wasn't even intelligible in the way speech is. It was an intrusion, a presence, a pressure. Instinctively, I reached for my weapon, but my arm felt heavy, unresponsive, as if gravity itself had doubled around me. The voice pressed again. "You carry the mark of the lost one." I didn't understand. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to deny whatever accusation the voice implied, but my throat felt sealed. My tongue heavy, my lungs tight. Panic clawed at my chest, urging me to flee, but the cathedral seemed to pulse around me, drawing me deeper, whispering with each beat of its unseen heart. Then, from behind the altar, something stepped into view. It was tall, humanoid in the loosest possible sense. Its limbs were too long, joints bending at impossible angles. Skin, or something pretending to be skin, hung in tattered sheets from its frame, revealing muscle that pulsed in time with the cathedral's heartbeat. Where its face should have been was only a smooth oval surface, glistening like wet clay. Yet I felt its gaze pierce straight through me with surgical precision. The creature tilted its head, the motion disturbingly graceful, almost curious. When it moved closer, its feet made no sound. The air around it shimmered with a low, resonant hum like the echo of a chant spoken long ago. My hand finally obeyed me. I drew my weapon. The creature stopped. It did not react with fear or aggression. Instead, its faceless head tilted again, and it raised one elongated hand in a gesture that could have been greeting, or warning, or pity. "You cannot kill what was made from the first breath," the voice whispered inside my skull. "But you may still choose to listen." The air thickened until every breath burned. My vision swam. The cathedral darkened, its walls contracting, its heartbeat quickening. The creature's presence pressed against me like a weight. My weapon trembled in my grip. And in that moment, somewhere between terror and awe, I realized something terrible. The cathedral wasn't just alive, it was waiting. And now, so was I. I remember the exact sound the galaxy made when hope finally broke, not shattered, not screamed, but broke. The way metal fails under strain after millennia of pressure, a long, groaning collapse that seemed to echo across the warp itself. And in that moment, as I watched Kal-El stagger through the ash-choked ruins of what had once been the Basilica of St. Eucarthus, I realized that even a god could look small beneath the weight of the Imperium he had tried so earnestly, so impossibly to save, for he walked like a man condemned, his cape torn to ribbons by warp winds, his armor cracked and fused with the golden blood of the custodes who had fallen beside him. And his eyes, those bright, defiant blue eyes, dimmed to something between grief and disbelief, as though he still couldn't comprehend how easily hope could be corrupted into weaponized cruelty. And as I followed him through the black drifting snow of burnt parchment and flayed banners, listening to the wounded city whisper through shattered Vox speakers that looped the same dying benediction over and over, I felt the awful truth settle in my bones. This was not the story of a hero triumphing, but of a universe too hungry, too cruel, too monstrously vast for even the strongest of ideals to survive unmutated. And every step Superman took seemed to drive that truth deeper into the bleeding ground beneath us. He had tried everything, reasoning with High Lords who saw compromise as weakness, pleading with Astartes who viewed mercy as heresy, even offering himself to the Inquisition for judgment if they would simply stop the extermination of yet another world accused of ideological impurity. But the Imperium does not negotiate with salvation. It survives by crushing anything that threatens the inertia of its fear, and so they turned on him, branded him a Xenos infiltrator, a warp-born deceiver wearing the face of a god of old Terra, and unleashed upon him a war machine built over 10,000 years of paranoia. Sisters of silence who suffocated his voice with null auras. Grey knights wielding psi-forged blades that cut even his skin. Titans firing salvos designed to pierce the hides of demons. And through all of it, he held back, always held back. Because killing was not his way, because he still believed he could save them even as they sought to tear him apart. And that was the tragedy. The quiet, horrifying tragedy. That hope, in this universe, only paints a larger target on your chest. By the time he reached the final sanctuary where the refugees hid, the world was already dying. Exterminatus had been ordered minutes earlier, and I watched Superman lash himself against the sky as if he could physically hold the orbital bombardment back with sheer will. His screams shaking the air, his hands glowing bright enough to cast long shadows through the ruins below. But even he could not stop a death sentence written in the language of cyclonic torpedoes and god engines. And when the fire fell, he wrapped himself around the sanctuary like a living barrier, taking the brunt of a strike that should have erased the hemisphere. And though he survived, barely, horrifically, he emerged carrying the scorched, trembling survivors in his arms like a father burdened with the weight of an entire civilization's sins. His flesh blackened, his bones visible where the heat had carved its signature into him. Yet still he carried them, and still he whispered, "You are safe. I won't let them hurt you." Even as the orbital cannons retargeted for a second strike. Something inside him broke in that moment. Not his body, though that too was failing, but something deeper. The small, unshakable faith he had always clung to. The belief that people, when shown kindness, would choose to be better. And I watched him look toward the burning heavens with an expression I had never imagined possible on the face of the last son of Krypton. Resignation, not of defeat but of understanding. The realization that he could not save the Imperium because it did not want to be saved, because its survival relied on crushing what he represented: hope, mercy, selflessness. And as the ground trembled beneath our feet, he rose into the air, not in triumph but in mourning, a glowing, wounded figure framed against the firestorm blooming across the horizon. And he whispered something so soft I almost missed it. "Then I will save who I can, even if it is only a handful." With the last of his strength, he tore a rift through the warp, not a violent wound like sorcerers made, but a narrow, trembling corridor of blue-white light, a raw opening carved not by malice or sorcery but by sheer desperate willpower, and he ushered the survivors into it, urging them through even as the warp writhed around him, trying to swallow him whole. I begged him to follow, to escape with us, but he only smiled, weakly, painfully, and said, "Someone has to close it behind you." And before I could reach him, before I could argue, the rift sealed around us like a closing eyelid. And the last image I saw was Superman standing alone beneath the falling fire. Cape burning away, eyes blazing with the defiant stubbornness of a dying star. Whether he lived or died, or became something far more tragic somewhere in the warp's unending labyrinth, none of us know. What we do know is that in a galaxy where hope is a liability, where mercy is punished and strength is twisted into tyranny, there existed, if only for a brief, impossible moment, a man who attempted the unthinkable. He tried to save the Imperium of man, not through conquest or fear or divine decree, but through kindness, and for that, the galaxy broke him. Perhaps in another reality, he would have succeeded, but not here, not now, not in the grim darkness of the far future, where even a god can fail. And even failure can be a kind of miracle.